I was 28 years old when I got fired from the company I had poured my life into. It wasn't some reckless mistake or missed deadline that did me in. No, I got fired because my boss wanted to make room for his son, Derek. A smug, barely qualified guy who wore designer suits and talked like he'd invented the business world after taking one semester of community college. I had been working at Norbridge Consulting for 6 years. Started as a junior analyst and clawed my way up to senior strategist by outworking everyone. I stayed late. I fixed others' messes. I held the line when major clients got shaky. And still, none of that mattered. The day I got the news, I was sitting in a meeting I had put together. A strategy session to pitch a major rebrand for one of our biggest clients. I'd built the deck myself. I'd rehearsed it a dozen times. My boss, Richard, showed up 10 minutes late, barely looked at the screen, and waved a hand. Hold off on the presentation, Tyler. Actually, let's talk in my office first. That was the first red flag. I should have known. I followed him upstairs. He didn't even sit down. Just stood behind his desk, hands folded, trying to look calm. This isn't easy, he said, but we've decided to make some internal changes. As of today, your position has been eliminated. I stared at him. Eliminated? It's a restructuring, he said quickly. We're streamlining departments. Derek will be stepping into a more active role in strategy going forward. I blinked. Derek? Your son. He didn't flinch. Yes, he's eager to learn. I felt like someone had punched me in the chest. So you're firing me to give your son my job? It's not personal, he said, which is the most personal thing a boss can ever say while screwing you. You've done good work here. We'll give you a strong reference. I didn't shout, didn't throw anything. I just stood there, silent. And in that silence, something inside me hardened. I shook his hand like a professional and walked out with my head up. But as I stepped into the elevator, my jaw clenched so tight I thought my teeth would crack. I wasn't angry because I lost a job. I was angry because I'd been loyal, and loyalty apparently meant nothing. I spent the next few weeks updating my resume and sending out applications, but something had shifted. I didn't want to be someone else's employee anymore. I didn't want to build someone else's dream. I wanted my own. And if life had taught me anything, it was that nobody was going to hand it to me. I had to take it, brick by brick. The first few months after getting fired were brutal. I drained half my savings just paying rent and living off cheap takeout. I interviewed for roles I was overqualified for, nodded politely at people who offered me entry-level growth opportunities, and swallowed the bitterness each time someone said, "Wow, I thought you were still with Norbridge." The hardest part wasn't the rejection, it was the quiet. The way the world just moved on like I'd never mattered. But in that quiet, I got to work. I started freelancing, consulting for small businesses that couldn't afford firms like Norbridge. I charged pennies just to get in the door, then blew people away with results. Word spread. One client became 3. 3 became 8. I worked out of coffee shops, kitchen tables, a tiny co-working space above a bakery. No assistants. No weekends. No sleep. Just hustle. Within a year, I had enough recurring contracts to officially register my own company, Lancer Strategies. I didn't make a big announcement. I didn't throw a party. I just printed the name on a plain white business card and started stacking wins. Meanwhile, Norbridge was still doing what it had always done, coasting on legacy. And Derek? He was now a partner, despite burning through at least 2 major client relationships. One of my former coworkers told me in passing that Derek once suggested launching a campaign using stock images pulled straight from Google without licenses. The guy didn't understand copyright law but was calling himself a strategist. I didn't laugh. I didn't even care. Because I wasn't trying to compete with them. I was building something better. Over the next 3 years, Lancer grew. I hired my first employee, then my 5th. We got a proper office. We landed contracts with up-and-coming tech firms and nonprofits that Norbridge wouldn't even look at. And slowly, the name started getting around. One day I got a call from an old Norbridge client. They'd heard I'd started my own thing and wanted to try me out. We crushed the campaign. They moved their entire budget to us. I didn't brag about it. I just kept going. Because revenge wasn't the goal. Success was. But revenge would soon come anyway. At year 4, I got an email from a private equity group. They were interested in expanding their portfolio with smaller agencies that showed growth. We've been watching your trajectory for a while, the message said. We believe Lancer Strategies could be positioned as a premium acquisition. I read the email 3 times. Not because I didn't understand, but because I couldn't believe how far I'd come. The meeting was set. They loved our books, loved our margins, loved the story. But what sealed it? The fact that we had taken clients directly from Norbridge. One of the partners smiled and said, "You know, we've been trying to get a foot in that door for years. You did it without a single cold call." And that's when they made the offer. A number so clean it didn't feel real. Enough to buy out Norbridge if I wanted. Enough to make this story come full circle. And suddenly, I knew exactly what I was going to do. The acquisition talks moved fast. By the time the paperwork was finalized, Lancer Strategies wasn't just profitable. We were the crown jewel in a growing portfolio. And with that kind of backing, I had leverage. I could have taken the money and walked away. Bought a house in the hills, traveled the world, started something new. But I wasn't done. Not yet. There was one thing left. One wrong I hadn't corrected. Norbridge, a firm that had kicked me out like I was disposable. That had handed my job to a man who couldn't even handle basic campaign math. That firm was still afloat, but barely. Over the past year, they'd lost 4 major clients. Rumors were swirling about internal instability, debt, and bad leadership. I knew what that meant. It was time. I contacted a broker and told him I was looking to acquire a legacy consultancy. Kept it vague. I didn't want them knowing it was me. Not yet. A few weeks later, I got the call. Norbridge was open to conversations. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I flew out the next day with 2 lawyers and an offer in hand. We met in a sterile conference room on the 12th floor of a building I used to walk into every day. Richard, my former boss, looked older, grayer, slower. He didn't recognize me at first. Just nodded stiffly, his eyes glazed from fatigue or fear. I couldn't tell which. And Derek? He wasn't even there. Word was he'd stepped back for personal reasons. I sat down across from Richard. This time, I didn't need his approval. I was the one offering terms. My team slid the papers across the table. Silence filled the room. Richard's hands trembled slightly as he flipped through the pages. "Lancer Strategies," he muttered. "You're with Lancer?" "I'm not with them," I said calmly. "I built them." He blinked. I watched the recognition click behind his eyes like a fuse being lit. "You, Tyler," I nodded. "No theatrics. No grand speeches. Just facts. You fired me for your son," I said. "And now I'm here to buy everything you built." His mouth opened, but nothing came out. My lawyer spoke. "Our offer is generous considering the debt load and the client attrition. If we close by end of quarter, we're prepared to retain a few senior staff. But ownership changes immediately." Richard swallowed hard. "You'd keep the name?" "No," I said flatly. "We'll be rebranding. Norbridge will no longer exist." The room went quiet. I leaned back, crossed one leg over the other, and added, "Consider it a restructure." His face went pale. I didn't need to yell. The silence did all the work. 15 minutes later, he signed. And just like that, the place that once kicked me out became mine. Every desk, every client, every file. But I didn't walk through the old halls that day. I didn't pose for photos or pop champagne. I just left, quietly. Because the loudest victories don't need an audience. They just need closure. The official paperwork took a few weeks to finalize, but the moment I stepped back into the Norbridge building, this time as the new owner, everything felt different. It wasn't pride or vengeance. It was clarity. I wasn't the man they fired. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't even angry anymore. I had outgrown all of that. The first thing I did was take down the frosted glass plaque that said Norbridge Consulting. I didn't smash it or burn it or post a photo. I just removed it and left it in the storage room, face down. We weren't keeping the name. We weren't keeping the culture. We were starting over. I called a full staff meeting that Friday. Most of the old employees didn't recognize me, just some guy in a blazer with a quiet voice and an unfamiliar badge. I stood in front of them and introduced myself as Tyler Graham, founder of Lancer Strategies and now the new CEO. Some people looked stunned. Others just seemed tired. I didn't give them a speech full of buzzwords or fake excitement. I told them the truth. "This place used to be something," I said. "But over time, it stopped rewarding effort. It stopped growing. It became about protecting titles and passing favors. That ends today. I paused, looked around the room. We're going to rebuild this company into something people are proud of. If you want to be a part of that, I'll give you every opportunity. If you're here for a paycheck and the corner office, this isn't going to be comfortable. Nobody clapped. I didn't want them to. I just wanted the message to land. Over the next few months, I cleaned house. Not recklessly, not to be dramatic, but precisely. Executives who didn't contribute were let go. Middle managers who played politics were replaced. But junior staff who had been overlooked, I promoted them, listened to them, mentored them. We renamed the company to Stone Grail, a mix of permanence and vision. And it wasn't just branding, we changed the structure. Flat hierarchy, clear performance goals, profit sharing. For the first time in years, people started smiling in the hallways. Clients started calling back. Some even said we were just waiting for someone else to take over. Derek reached out about 4 months in. Sent a short email that said, "Congrats. Didn't realize you were behind Lancer. Would love to grab coffee and catch up." I didn't reply, not out of spite, but because some doors, once closed, don't need to be reopened. He wasn't part of this story anymore. I wasn't chasing validation from anyone. I had built something better. One afternoon, I walked into the new break room, which we'd renovated to be open and bright. 2 interns were talking about a marketing pitch they were working on. I overheard one of them say, "Man, Tyler's actually cool. You can just walk up to him and pitch stuff." That never happened before. I smiled, not because I wanted to be liked, but because I remembered what it was like to sit in that exact chair, feeling invisible. And now, no one in this company would ever feel that again. 6 months after the acquisition, the company had not only stabilized, it was growing. We were landing contracts Norbridge couldn't dream of in its final years. People were excited to come to work again. They believed in what we were building. And for the first time in a long time, I did too. I got into the habit of walking through the office every morning, no entourage, no announcements. Just checking in, shaking hands, asking questions. It wasn't for show. I wanted to know what people were dealing with, what ideas they had, what wasn't working. Because the culture of silence is what killed Norbridge in the first place. I refused to let that happen again. One day, I was reviewing onboarding files for a new hire, mid-level strategist, decent resume, nothing flashy, when a name caught my eye. Daniel Reed. My hands froze. He'd been one of the guys who'd sat quietly in the background during the meeting where I got fired. Never said a word. Never looked me in the eye. Just nodded along while Richard gutted my career. And now? He had applied to the company I built. At first, I thought about rejecting him. Out of principle. But something held me back. I decided to bring him in for an interview. He walked into the room and froze when he saw me. "Tyler," he said, voice unsure. I didn't smile, just motioned for him to sit. "Daniel," I replied. "Good to see you again." The interview was short. I asked what he'd been doing. He gave a polished rundown, marketing jobs, small firms, a lot of bouncing around. Then I asked the only question I cared about. "You remember the day Richard fired me, right?" He swallowed. "Yeah, I do." "You didn't say anything." He looked down. I was new. I didn't think it was my place. I leaned back in my chair. "And what do you think now?" He hesitated. "I think I should have spoken up. I've thought about that day more than you'd believe." There was no spin in his voice. No fake charm. Just a quiet regret that felt real. I didn't offer him the job. Not right away. I told him I'd think about it. A week later, I did approve his hire. Not because I owed him, but because I believed people could grow. If I was going to rebuild something better, I had to lead better too. A month later, we stood in the break room and he told me, "You're running this place differently, man. It's actually inspiring." I nodded. That's the idea. As the months passed, more familiar names trickled in. Former Norbridge staff, clients, even vendors. Some came back surprised. Some came back ashamed. But I welcomed the ones who had learned. The ones who didn't try to rewrite history. Just show up and do the work. Because real revenge isn't about slamming doors or flipping tables. It's about doing so well that the people who underestimated you have no choice but to watch you rise. And that's exactly what I was doing. Quietly, steadily, without apology. Exactly 5 years to the day since I got fired. I found myself walking past the same elevator I had once exited in shock and silence. But now I wasn't a broken employee. I was the owner. I paused at the lobby window, sipping coffee from a cup that had my company's new name on it, Stone Grail. A quiet smile tugged at my face, not because I was proud, but because I was finally free. That evening, we hosted a company dinner, nothing flashy, just a simple celebration of how far we'd come. As I stood up to say a few words, I looked around the room and saw faces that had once been ignored, now shining. People who had never spoken in meetings now led projects. Interns who once fetched coffee now ran departments. It wasn't just my win. It was ours. I told them the truth. This company exists because one door closed. And I didn't break down that door. I built a better one. They clapped, not out of politeness, but because they understood. They'd lived it too. The next morning, I received an email from Richard. No subject line, just a single sentence. I see what you've built. It's impressive. No apology. No attempt to reconnect. Just acknowledgement. And honestly, that was enough. I didn't need more. I didn't reply. I archived the message and went back to work. That was my closure. Years ago, I thought revenge would look like shouting in someone's face, rubbing their failure in their nose, demanding they see what they lost. But now I know true revenge is living well. It's succeeding without their help, their validation, or their permission. It's building something so strong they have to watch from the sidelines, knowing they played themselves. I used to want Richard to regret firing me. Now I just want him to understand that loyalty is earned, not demanded. That real leaders lift people up, not use them as stepping stones for family legacies. That companies don't collapse because of competition. They collapse when they stop listening, when they promote comfort over character. I built Stone Grail to be different, and it is. We aren't perfect, but we're honest. We're hungry, and we treat every single person like they matter because they do. So if you've ever been pushed out, underestimated, or cast aside, don't wait for someone to fix it for you. Build something. It won't be easy. It won't be fast. But one day you'll look around and realize you never needed their permission in the first place. You just needed the chance to prove them wrong. And when that moment comes, smile, then get back to work. Because success isn't a finish line. It's the life you live after the storm has passed. And I'm living mine. Every single day.